what was the real reason for Russia to attack Ukraine? It had been obvious even before the attack that if Russia struck Ukraine even temporarily, even for a short period of time, my motherland would be in so much trouble. It would become sanctioned, isolated, and basically cursed by the entire world. That's what happens when you start a war, even a tiny war, but a war. It had been obvious to any normal person that the society would split and radicalize, that the economy would crash, that millions of people would leave Russia. It'd been absolutely clear to any person with even tiny bit of brains in the head that the decision to attack Ukraine would be absolutely stupid and incredibly, tremendously evil. I had not believed it would happen. I've said it many times. Yet in the morning of February 24th, we all learned that Russia treacherously attacked Ukraine. Right away, two clear reasons were given for the attack. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia was to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. Of course, it was clear that those goals were, how do I say that politely, mildly, a bunch of horse manure. And from the day one, I have been wondering why Russia did what it did. I heard many people say that Russia has done that for the resources. And every single time I heard that, I kept saying, nonsense. Boy, was I wrong. Howdy, everyone. My name is Konstantin. Welcome to Inside Russia, where I give you news updates, current events, and things unfolding that I find important, my takes and views on them. Usual Russia explained by the unusual Russian. Today I would like to talk about true reason why Russia attacked Ukraine. A very revealing live stream, let me tell you. You know what, without further ado, I will jump right into it. First things first. Why I thought that the official reasons given to us were manure. Well, because plain and simple, I had seen Ukraine with my own eyes. I lived in Ukraine. I traveled there dozens of times. I traveled there as late as 2018, not too long ago. I worked there. I have many friends there. I know Ukraine from inside out. So Putin, by saying that Russia was to denazify Ukraine, was aiming at people who were clueless about what really was going on in the country. And to the people that had never been to Ukraine before. Because if they had traveled to Ukraine, they would know that there weren't any Nazis in the country. Moreover, they would know that Ukrainians were a lot like Russians in many ways. Moreover, they would know that most Ukrainians were very sympathetic toward Russia and Russian people. Perhaps Putin was clueless and misinformed himself about the hordes of Nazis in Ukraine. I don't rule this possibility, okay? He could have been. I don't know. So his speech was aimed at the clueless, the unknowledgeable, and the uninformed. And for demilitarizing Ukraine, that reason was even a bigger pile of manure. What right did Russia have to demilitarize Ukraine? What rights does Russia have to demilitarize any other country? Russia is, it's the second biggest exporter of armament in the world. after the USA. It means that Russia is loaded with weapons, both offensive and defensive itself. Weapons of all kinds. Imagine if any other country would not like that, would not like the amount of weapons that Russia possesses, and would decide to demilitarize Russia, would start attacking Russia, bombing the airports, military facilities, killing Russians, basically to demilitarize Russia. Well, obviously, the second reason is a pile of manure as well. And you know what? A lot of Russians don't understand that. I've spoken to dozens and dozens of people who have supported the war in Ukraine, what Russia is doing in Ukraine, and I asked them the two simple questions. Have you ever been to Ukraine? How do you know if there are Nazis there? And the second question is, why do you think that Russia has a right to demilitarize Ukraine? And, the answers were given usually, well, of course they're Nazis, otherwise we wouldn't be striking them. The government knows better. Okay. Have you ever been to Ukraine yourself? No, I have not. Case closed. And the second question is, why would we want to, and what right do we have to demilitarize Ukraine? Because Ukraine is loaded with weapons and the government says it was going to attack us. Okay. Did it attack Russia? No, it did not. Then I asked a very simple question. I would ask, well, lots of weapons in Russia. Imagine if another country doesn't like that and starts attacking us to demilitarize us. And the person would immediately follow up, said, no, that's not right. That's not possible. I said, they can't do that. I said, why can't they do that? Well, they can't do that because they can't demilitarize us. Well, they can't do it to us, but we can do it to Ukraine. And usually after a person would hear that, he or she would get into a stupor. Okay, case closed. So the second reason, to demilitarize Ukraine, when applied just a tiny bit of common sense, would turn out to be a bunch of manure as well. By the way, the official propaganda has dropped those explanations recently, well, basically in a few last months, as those explanations never existed before, as if they've never gotten out of Vladimir Putin's mouth. Very convenient, if something you don't like when you say later, you just don't talk about it, like if it didn't happen. But you know what? We remember. And someone has to be held responsible for that. For denazifying when there's no Nazis, demilitarizing when there's no right. So, moving on. What was the real reason Russia started the war? Very important question. I've been asking this question myself for the past 11 months. I researched, I analyzed, I thought, I read, I spoke to people, I asked. I've gone through tons of different possibilities. I even looked at some conspiracy theories. It's the most important question. Why would Russia shoot itself into both feet, then both elbows, then both hands, then shoot itself into stomach and would be laying on the ground, bleeding to death in agony? It had been so obvious that this exact thing would happen to the country if Russia was to attack Ukraine. It was anyone. It does not take a rocket scientist to understand what would have happened. And Russia did that anyway. The decision makers, the leadership, they decided to do it. Why? Oh, why? One question I couldn't answer. At the end, I kept refusing one explanation. Russia wanted more resources. There's oil, gas, and other resources in that Russia wanted to get its hands on in Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense on top of things that don't make any sense to me. Because Russia has so much more resources than Ukraine that the amount of the resources is incomparable. Russia wanting Ukrainian oil, Ukrainian gas. Just look at the map of Russia and think of the vastness of its resources. Ukrainian oil, gas, metals, and such would be just a drop in the ocean of Russian resources. So the resources grab was out of the question for me until now. I'll remind you, most of you know how I operate, but I'll remind you, I always look for small details that I find important, and I put many of those details into a large picture. It's like putting together a puzzle. And today I have reconsidered the resource explanation. Now I'm going to give you two things: a fact of a new Russian legislation and confidential inside information from one of the oligarchs. And I'm going to put that information together. I'm going to put two and two together. First things first. According to Izvestia newspaper, there has been some major changes of how Russian officials, government officials, politicians declare their incomes. You see, before, the politicians had to declare income, had to make their incomes, their assets they owned, their revenues, the taxes they paid, they had to make it transparent for the taxpayers and the voters to know. And it makes very much sense. So the Izvestia newspaper informed that income declarations in the Western world, it's called tax return forms, of government officials, including local and federal representatives and senators, will cease to be published starting this year, 2023. The newspaper, citing a source in the State Duma, it's Russian parliament, Committee on State Construction, and the information was confirmed to the newspaper by the head of the committee, Pavel Krasheninnikov. It's a famous Russian senator. The news source pointed out that from year 2023, only very general information about income declarations of the politicians, how many of the politicians submitted income declarations, whether violations were detected in those declarations, this general information, that's statistical information, will be published. Only general statistical information, that's it. At the same time, the data on the incomes of representatives and senators and their real estate assets and such will no longer be made public. Not only they don't have to, not only public will not know what they earned and what kind of assets they gained, but all their assets, all their public financial records will disappear, will be closed, basically. They will not disappear, but will be closed to the public. Previously, all politicians had to publish income data by April 1st every year. In December last year, Vladimir Putin signed a decree, presidential decree, that exempts from declaring income, expenses, and property the military, security forces, and officials who have previously taken or will take part in a military operation in Ukraine and in the military operations to come. I'll remind you that the Russian senators are mostly rich people. The richest member of the lower chamber of parliament, State Duma, in 2020 2021 declared income of approximately 50 million of American dollars. And the richest member of the upper chamber declared income of around 60 million American dollars. That was just 1 year income, in 2021. All details were given, all property is public and so forth. The law is the law. Well, the law was the law. Now, rewritten by Putin's decree, we will not any longer know who earns what and who owns what. Now, why would they do that? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, the senators, they keep on living the way they have been living. They keep on earning the way they have been earning. Why such a secrecy? I mean, what's going to happen to make that decision to close public records? Delete them, make them unavailable to the public. And there's another little detail. Only those who take part in the war. That's the presidential decree says. You wonder why. The second document I received and studied is the inside one. That's a presentation from a Russian rich man, and I will not tell you the name, otherwise people would retaliate. So, a presentation from a Russia's one of the Russia's rich men, oligarchs, you could say, of what resources and enterprises in Ukraine will become his. You heard me right. A plan to annex large enterprises such as a large mining and processing plant, ferroalloy plant, large mines, and so forth. And that's just one guy. How many others are virtually dividing Ukraine now, considering Ukrainian resources and enterprises already theirs? How many powerful and rich Russians are doing that? Think about that. This is a revelation. Russia, as the country, does not need other countries' resources. Russia as the country, as a whole, Russian people in general, the populace, that they don't need Ukrainians' resources. Because there's so much resources in Russia already. But certain individuals who have power to declare war or convince those who have power to declare war, they increase their personal net worth by biting off tiny bits at countries' scale, but large bits for individuals when the war starts. You see what they're doing? They're promoting the war. They have promoted the war. That's a reason why this whole thing started. Because some individuals, driven by greed and God knows what else they're driven by, they decided to take Ukrainian resources and enterprises and make theirs. Now, put two and two together. The first news I told you and the second one. Why would they need to hide public records on how powerful people, the ones who have power to declare war, to stop war, to do things, why would they need to hide all of a sudden, start hiding their public income statements? Well, tax return forms. Perhaps if they don't do that in 2023, public will see how net worth of Russian politicians, officials, military service people, and so forth, those described in Putin's presidential decree, Perhaps public will know how their net worth changes. And if public sees that, people will start asking questions. And the biggest question will be, what the fudge? So, makes sense. They hide the public records, so no one knows what kind of assets, new assets, what kind of new resources, what kind of money they made from, from things. Now it all makes sense. So I'm looking at the war that Russia started in Ukraine at a different angle now. I have understood the reason for myself, and perhaps it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons, but I think it's clearly a reason. And this reason is the bottom line. Plain and simple, the bottom line. This is the special business operation with lots of blood. I wonder what these people, whether they understand what they're doing or not. And this has been my message for today. Thank you so much for giving me another chance watching and listening to my message. I would like to turn on the comments and ask you to give me feedback. Let me know what you think. You agree or disagree with me. Perhaps you have any questions I would love to answer. And before I turn on the comments, as usual, I ask you two things. First, please help spread my message by making reposts in the social media accounts. And the second, please join my Telegram channel called Inside Konstantin's Russia to stay updated and get the announcements about things that happen on the channel. Thank you so very much. Turning the comments on now.